We don't need to be embarrassed about our colonial past. Every country in the world, at one point or another, either colonized or attempted to colonize another group of people.
She does believe that some cultures are more superior to the others.
So which cultures, in your view, are less valid than others?
Oh, lots. Cultures that believe in child marriage, for instance.
When it comes to her policies, I believe that not all skin folk is kinfolk, as they say in America, you know.
A lot of people know that I grew up in Nigeria. And that is one of the things that fundamentally shaped my view of the world.
I'm reluctant to want to claim her as a Nigerian because this is not what...
Why are you reluctant, Mr. Steve?
Because she doesn't appear to see herself as one.
There are many things that the British Empire got wrong, but there are many amazing things that the British Empire also did. And we need to be honest about that and stop pretending that it was all bad.
That if you conduct a referendum or a poll, particularly among Nigerians or among blacks of African descent in the UK, I doubt if she will be very popular.
A couple of days ago, I released a video on glass ceilings in the West for black people. And I cited Kemi Badenoch, the new leader of the Conservative Party in the UK, as someone who's broken through glass ceilings. I really didn't have any political angle. I really didn't have an angle on whether or not she's a good person or she claims this or she claims that. I just was highlighting the fact that she's risen to a position of prominence that no other black person has ever risen to before in the UK. I think that is one hell of an achievement, and I'm very happy that UK has been able to get to a place where they can accept a black person in such a position. Now, I noticed that in the comments section, there was another discussion happening, all about, can we claim her? You know, there was a lot of back and forth about she's not for us, she doesn't represent us. And this is how a lot of black people seem to feel. It's not everyone, but there is a lot of that sentiment going around. This was also double stamped when a big back and forth conversation happened in my main WhatsApp friend group. For those of you that don't know, my name is TJ. I moved to Uganda a year and a half ago from the UK. I've grown up in the UK most of my life, but my early life was spent in Nigeria. My dad is Nigerian, he's a Yoruba. My mum is a white English lady. This is my wheelhouse. I lived in Nigeria at the same time period that Kemi lived in Nigeria. There are many similarities from Kemi's journey to the UK and my family to the UK. I have 3 older sisters, all who were teenagers, just like Kemi was at the same time when we moved from Nigeria to the UK. So with that being said, who is she? Let's find out what she's all about.
A lot of people know that I grew up in Nigeria. And that is one of the things that fundamentally shaped my view of the world. I was born in Wimbledon, but till 16, that's where I pretty much lived with bits and bobs in the US. And one of the things that worries me is that we take this country for granted. Other countries which aren't doing well, it's not because the people there are stupid. It's bad ideas, bad culture, bad policies. And that is what destroys countries. And we are very lucky here. The things that happened, the path that we took in the UK, in a lot of Western Europe, in the US, is something that is rare. Most countries have gone wrong by doing other stuff. And so my conservative beliefs come from those fundamental principles. And it's why the campaign that I'm running is starting with principles first. Equality under the law. I cannot explain just how critical it is. Making sure everybody is treated exactly the same. Doesn't matter what you look like, where you come from, what your status in society is. That you'll go in front of a judge and it's equal before the law. Things like the concept of being innocent until you're proven guilty. It is quite a radical concept. Many places are you're guilty, prove that you're innocent. It totally changes the way a culture and a society works. Growing up without constant electricity means I'm very paranoid about energy. That is why I'm a net zero skeptic. I know what it's like when the lights don't turn on, and it's another thing we take for granted. Energy is growth. And this is why when I ask people to support me, it's not because we know exactly what the energy policy is going to be in 2029, we need to look at what the world looks like then. It's what kind of person is Kemi? Which direction is she going to take us? Where are her convictions? I grew up under a military dictatorship. So I wasn't dreaming about, oh, one day you're going to be president or prime minister. Or the people who ran the country were soldiers, and they were very visible. The local, well, the state governors were soldiers. The equivalent of a Ron DeSantis was, a Navy captain and things like that. And that was just what life was. I mean, what is amazing is that I'm here at all. And I did not even know that I had British citizenship until I was about 14. So lots of people think, oh, you were born here to get the citizenship. They don't understand that story of empire, that story of the Commonwealth. And people say, oh, you can't possibly be British. You have to, the ethnicity is all wrong and so on. And I challenge them and say, you don't realize that for 150 years, there were people from here going to other countries saying, you are all British now. You're British, you're part of the British Empire. And that doesn't just disappear because that goes away. That there is a legacy that comes from that.
So she grew up in Nigeria till she's 16. 16 is an incredibly impactful time on your life, right? Your teenage years. For example, they say that the music you listen to at 16, 17 is going to be your favorite music for the rest of your life. So we now understand the lens by which we're talking. She's explained who she is, and she also explained what she stands for, what she believes, equality under the law, and she touches on a few things that give you a window into how she perceives Nigeria versus the UK. If there's anybody here that's Nigerian, they understand about power going out. NEPA, the power company. In fact, up until I came to the UK, I thought electricity was called NEPA. To this day, Nigeria still has a problem with blackouts. Now, that was true in the 70s and 80s, in the era that Kemi's talking about when she was there, and it is still true today. For me, that is an absolute crime, that in the past 40 years, Nigeria cannot get its act together so that there's consistent power for its people. When you're coming from that background, and you go to a place like UK, where there's power constantly, it is very easy to take it for granted. I took it for granted, because I feel it so badly when the power goes out here. And it happens maybe once a week, once every couple of weeks. And even just that amount lets me know, man, it's good for infrastructure to work properly. I don't know what Kemi went through in Nigeria up until the age of 16. But let me just touch upon a couple of things that my family have been through being in Nigeria at that period of time. My mum talks about going through hyperinflation, where you'd get your paycheck on a Friday. She was a school teacher, and she would go directly to buy food with the entire check, because within a few days, the price of food would go up and you wouldn't be able to afford it with that week's check. There was a period where the naira and the pound were at parity. The currency has been totally annihilated versus the pound and the dollar. Another thing that our family went through, and many other families that we know went through, is things like armed robberies, a highly traumatic experience that many Nigerians understand and have been through. And there are countless stories of police harassment. A few years ago, we saw people marching around the time of the Black Lives Matter movement, going against police harassment. That was just a few years ago. An old school friend of my sister called my sister and told a story of how she spent a night in jail. And my sister said, what happened? And he said, oh, well, I pulled up at the traffic lights in my car, and the policeman came and knocked on the window and said, you didn't stop at the line. Basically, he was looking for a bribe. And she said, well, I'm not giving you a bribe for not stopping at the line. And one thing led to another, and she ended up being arrested and taken to jail because she didn't give a bribe and she didn't stop at the line. And my sister said, why didn't you just stop at the line? Why weren't you compliant in the first place? When you get to the red light, you stop at the line. And she said, the road is a dirt road. There is no line. And that should just frame the kind of experiences that some people go through growing up in Nigeria. Now, Nigeria has a lot going for it. I'm a proponent of coming back to Africa. I love the idea of the growth of Africa. I'm for the idea of the growth of Africa. But let's call a spade a spade. There are massive problems in Africa. And there are many Nigerians that are in the UK that have no intention of ever stepping foot back in the continent of Africa. They've had enough. They got out and they went through whatever they went through in Nigeria, of which they were left traumatized, and they do not want to deal with the corruption, which is another massive problem over there. And they're like, we're happy to be British. Our kids are British and we don't want anything to do with that. That is just the reality of what it is when you go to UK and you talk to Nigerians. Many of them have the attitude of, why would I go back there? That country couldn't give me power. It couldn't keep me safe. It didn't give me the things that I needed when I needed it. So I got out. I'm not down for the corruption. Let's not pretend that there's not many Nigerians trying to jump up and leave Nigeria and start better lives in Canada and America and UK and etc. So let's hear some of the commentary around what people are saying, the Nigerians are saying about Kemi.
One thing I will say about Kemi is that the new leader, Kemi Badenoch, the new leader of the Conservative Party, is that when it comes to her policies, I believe that not all skin folk is kinfolk, as they say in America. You know, she does believe that some cultures are better superior to the others. You know, she has had her views when it comes to multiculturalism, when it comes to immigration, that sometimes are not kind to her skin folk. But what do you think, Mr. Steve?
First black woman to lead a major party in the UK. That's a big deal. I believe she'll be about the sixth woman, isn't it, that will be the leader in that country, particularly for the Tories. But you know, so that's the big deal part of it. I'm reluctant to want to claim her as a Nigerian. Because this is not what...
Why are you reluctant, Mr. Steve?
Because she doesn't appear to see herself as one. I think that she thinks that she was from here, you know, but she carries on. And not only does she carry on as a Briton, and she is within her right to do that. But then I won't be a big fan of anyone who talks down on where they're from.
Yes.
And I think that seems to be what she represents. She's fond of doing that.
She recently said, that when she was younger, she was good in math and sciences, and they told her to get into the kitchen. And I'm like, I don't know any, she comes from a family of intellectuals. I don't know any young woman who grew up being good in school, coming from a family that your parents are lecturers or in the medical field, and they'll tell you to get back into the kitchen. I think that's a Western image painted of Nigerian society rather than an authentic representation of what Nigerian society is.
Correct. And when she says that, when she sounds traumatic about why she left Nigeria, at 16, and I believe that should be around 1996 when we were still under the military. I do not know the things that she encountered that, made her leave on the one hand, and then, make her talk in the manner that she talks, about Nigeria and about her experiences in Nigeria. I find that worrying for somebody who wants to lead a major party and who ultimately, when she's seeking for votes, to be the prime minister, will need to speak to Nigeria. It looks to me that if you conduct a referendum or a poll, particularly among Nigerians or among blacks of African descent in the UK, I doubt if she will be very popular.
So this gentleman is right. He doesn't know what she went through when she left Nigeria. Like I said, my family's been through armed robbery, police harassment, right? Not to mention just the normal things that are accepted, power outages, all of the hassle and corruption that you have to face when you're dealing with Nigeria. It's a beautiful place, but it's uncomfortable compared with the standards of other countries in many regards. This is not to be disrespectful to Yoruba culture and their history, but you have no idea what she went through. Many Nigerians know what was going on and what still goes on in Nigeria that is unfair for many. There's this guy, David Hoima, who's in hiding. This guy has had to flee the country for exposing corruption on the highest levels. Nigeria's got a long way to go before we can call it any type of paradise, or it can even match up to the most advanced countries in the world. Now, those countries have their problems, yes, but if we were to line up everybody and say live under these conditions or live under UK's conditions, I think many people would choose UK. Now, just to clarify, I believe the UK has peaked. It's no longer the place of the future, which is why I'm back in Africa. But it's still up there. Everything infrastructurally still works. Trains may be late, but they work. What's your experience of catching a train in Nigeria? If you're going to come out and say that she believes not all skin folk are kinfolk, then you must quote her accurately. You must quote her accurately. The accusation given there was that she feels that some cultures are superior to other cultures. Let's go to what she's referencing, the wording used.
Now, you've written this morning about immigration, and you write that we cannot assume that all cultures are equally valid. So which cultures, in your view, are less valid than others?
Oh, lots. Cultures that believe in child marriage, for instance, or that women don't have equal rights.
Okay, what's wrong with that? And what has that got to do with skin folk? What's that got to do with kinfolk and skin folk? Who is raising their hand in Nigeria asking for child marriage? Who is raising their hand asking for women to not have equal rights? What's wrong with that? Okay, she's about to clarify further, but the term that she used was not superior. She said valid. She's saying, I do not accept these elements of certain people's culture. Child marriage is one I don't accept. What's wrong with that? Women not being treated equal is one I do not accept. What's wrong with that? She didn't say anything about being superior, and she didn't say anything about race or color.
I actually think it's extraordinary that people think that's an unusual or controversial thing to say. Of course, not all cultures are equally valid. I don't believe in cultural relativism. I believe in Western values, the principles which have made this country great. And I think that we need to make sure that we continue to abide by those principles to keep the society that we have now.
So which particular cultures then would you say are less valid? Because as you've said, your words, not mine.
Still trying to trap her in the same concept. A semantic game. A semantic game. She's trying to trap her, shifting the intent of what she said.
Some people think that that is a controversial thing to say. So which cultures would you specifically say are less valid than others?
So it's not about labeling cultures. Culture includes a lot of things. I'm not talking about cuisine. I'm talking about customs.
So she can be at home eating amala and eba. She could be at home eating amala and eba, listening to Sunny Ade. It's not about that aspect of culture. It's about the principles of fairness for all, regardless of skin color. Things like child marriage. And if there are communities that are moving into the UK that have those types of values, we don't want them. That's what she's saying.
I think that cultures where women are told that they should not work, I would knock on doors. I'm sure Penny and Jake had this. You'd knock on doors and you'd see somebody at the door who says, oh, I can't speak to you, I will get my husband. I don't think that's as equally valid as our culture. But the point I was making in the op-ed was about immigration, that immigration is something which we need to make sure we get right. We didn't before. And there were three things I said we needed to do. One, numbers matter. I was quite surprised that Rob actually misrepresented what I've been saying. Numbers do matter. Culture matters even more. Who comes into the country is absolutely critical. And leadership. You need to start from the top. It's no good simply saying we're going to lower immigration and outsource it. It has to come very much from the Prime Minister himself or herself.
Are you saying, though, that if somebody in their culture who lives here in the UK, who might be a British citizen, who answered the door to you and said, I won't speak to you, I'd like you to speak to my husband instead, are you saying, you have said their culture is less valid, are you saying that people with those beliefs shouldn't be welcome in the UK?
I mean, she's just explained it. You're pushing back into this narrative. And this is what I hate about politics today, is that it's all about spin and narrative. I want to support someone based off what someone's actually trying to communicate, not a fabrication or a shift or a spin of what they said. Listen very closely to what she's saying and let's judge her on that. If what she says is bad, then let's kick her out. But I don't want to judge her based on your filter of what she said. Listen to what she says.
I am saying that if we want to have a well-integrated society, we need to make sure that we have a shared culture and a shared identity. This is a multi-ethnic society. That's obvious. I'm a black woman sitting here talking to you. But there is a difference between being multi-ethnic and being multicultural. I grew up in a place that was multicultural, and yet everybody looked the same. Conflict arises when you emphasize difference. We need to emphasize the thing that we share. Being British, British values, the things that we talked about, freedom, equal rights, personal responsibility, not discriminating people because of their sexual orientation. There are some cultures that do that. I don't think that a culture that thinks gay people should be stoned is as valid as ours. This is not a controversial thing to say.
First of all, I want to highlight, she speaks extremely clearly. She doesn't stutter. She doesn't mince around words. She doesn't take you on a journey like many politicians. Oh, let me be clear. And then they don't tell you anything. They just wind you down some story that I hear many politicians doing. She's concise and clear, which is a breath of fresh air when it comes to speaking in politics. Again, you might not agree with what she says. Fair enough. If you're on the left and she's on the right and that's opposing to your beliefs, fine. But that's a political issue. But she is clear about what she says and she's concise, and we should not spin her words. She didn't say people are inferior. She didn't say anyone was inferior. She said it's not valid. I don't want these values. She also mentioned that she grew up in a place where people had the same skin color, but they didn't share the same cultural values. Let's just break into that for a second, for a little bit. Nigeria is a country of many tribes, the three main tribes, Hausa, Yoruba, and Igbo. I want to highlight for a moment some of the difficulties between those tribes. We had the Biafran War. I have family members that remember that time period, living memory, okay? So my uncle came to visit us in the UK when I was a teenager, and we went for a trip all around London to show him the sights and everything. Both my uncle and my dad have tribal marks on their face. Now, my dad's tribal marks are kind of not very prominent. You could look at him and you could miss it. But my uncle's ones are extremely visible, big scars on his cheeks. So I asked him, you know, in the modern world, are you ever conscious about those marks and how people look at you and treat you? He said to me that I'm proud of my tribal marks, and these tribal marks saved my life. And I said, how did these tribal marks save your life? He said that around the period of the Biafran War, I don't know exactly the beginning or end or whatever was going on, he was in a part of Nigeria and he was friends with everybody. He didn't care whether you were Igbo, Hausa, whatever. And he was really into American culture and he wore a big afro. And the problem was that that was associated with a style of hair for Igbo people. At least this is what he told me at the time. It was the fashion of the time. So he was on this street and he was talking with his friends. Some of them were Igbo, some of them were Yoruba, and they were just like hanging out on the street. And the military arrived. And when the military arrived, they rounded up all of the Igbo people. And because of his hairstyle, he was grouped in with the Igbos. And they put all of them in a pit. Put all of them in a pit. And he was protesting, saying, why am I being put in the pit? And they said, because you're Igbo. And he said, no, I'm not Igbo. Look at my tribal marks. You can see by my tribal marks that I'm Yoruba. So they pull him out of the pit and they say, okay, your tribal marks show us that you're Yoruba. But because of your hairstyle, you're fraternizing, you're enjoying with these Igbo guys. So when my boss comes, when the Oga comes, he's going to lump you in with the Igbos because you're with them. So one of the soldiers there, before the main boss turned up, said, if you cut off your hair, it won't be an issue. Make sure you cut this hair off. But there was no scissors or anything around. So they broke a glass bottle and they scraped his hair bald with a glass bottle so that he wouldn't have to stay in the pit with the other Igbo guys. And everyone was held there. And when the boss came, when the Oga came, they burnt everyone in that pit alive. When I asked my uncle about the tribal marks, I was not expecting such a story. This is Nigerian history in living memory. This is conflict, intertribal conflict between black people of two different tribes in one country. Even though that they even shared a lot of cultural similarities, they found a way to find their differences. Now, there's lots of other factors involved, but my point is that when you go to Africa, there is tribalism and it has nothing to do with skin color because everybody's black. And let's not forget things like the Rwanda genocide and all sorts of problems going on in South Sudan right now. And this is what she's talking about. She's talking about finding the values that the UK wants to represent and saying, if you don't have these values, you're not welcome here. Because it doesn't matter if there's an Asian person, a black person, a white person, a Hispanic person. If we all have shared values, if one set of that group thinks that child marriage at 12 is okay, then we're going to have a problem. So let's make sure we all have the same values and find the places that we can agree on. Now, if you say that she's not for Nigeria, what about her actions? Let's take a look.
The UK Minister of Business and Trade, Kemi Badenoch, says that the United Kingdom is committed to bridging the trade deficit in Nigeria through the enhanced trade partnership, which will be signed with her Nigerian counterpart in Abuja on Tuesday.
She was working on the trade deficit in Lagos, Nigeria. Why can't you claim her? She wasn't in Syria alone, she was in Nigeria. She's trying to help and make a deal with in Lagos with Nigerians. This is her actions. I didn't hear anything about those actions.
She revealed this at the reception in her honor in Lagos. The ETP, she says, will also help build investor confidence in Nigeria. During the same event, the Nigerian Minister for Trade, Industry and Investment, Dr. Doris Uzokanite, said when she signed, the ETP will make Nigeria a more favorable partner to the United Kingdom.
So Nigerians don't want to claim her. So they don't want to claim her when she's trying to work on the Nigerian deficit. They don't want to claim her? What, because she said that some cultures are less valid than others? Everyone's got a talking point and everyone's so ready to be offended. And coming up in the next clip is something that many people are not going to agree with. Here's probably the most controversial take that I've heard people talking about when they criticize her and not being able to claim her as Black or Nigerian.
There are many things that the British Empire got wrong, but there are many amazing things that the British Empire also did. And we need to be honest about that and stop pretending that it was all bad. The British Empire ended slavery, the Atlantic slave trade. We need to talk about that more. I grew up, as many of you know, I grew up in a Commonwealth country. Many people in those countries don't actually carry the baggage that a lot of the left-leaning commentariat want to put on our country. We need to look at how we can help other countries develop as best as they can. We did a lot to help many of those countries. We can do more again. I would like to see that, but the answer is definitely not reparations.
The Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting starts next week. Should we be embarrassed about our colonial past?
No. We don't need to be embarrassed about our colonial past. Every country in the world, at one point or another, either colonized or attempted to colonize another group of people. This is the past. We need to talk about the future. There are many countries now who want to use guilt to try and exploit the UK. They ask for reparations. I saw it as a trade minister. It's not culture wars. I was at the WTO. I won't name the minister from another country. And he was telling me that we needed to give up some of the things that we were doing because of colonialism and because they needed time to develop. These arguments are a scam. Don't fall for it. We need to make sure that we put this country first. We work well with our neighbors. We work well with other countries, but we have to look after ourselves too.
I'd like to highlight a couple of things, if you'd be so kind as to hear my point of view. The first thing is, at the beginning of the conversation, she acknowledged that the British had done bad things. And I appreciate people that can acknowledge bad things, even when their point of view may not be favorable. When it comes to these deeply painful matters, such as slavery, I'm happy to have the conversation about how bad it was, all the problems that that's caused. I'm happy to look with a critical eye, with a objective view on the damage that that caused. That is a valid thing to talk about and a valid thing to be discussed. And if people are angry about it, that's fine. The question is, how should we handle it moving forward? Again, that would be the reparations versus not reparations argument. She's speaking from a British point of view. Nigerians in Nigeria are not crying about slavery. That's not a major talking point or a major issue, because if it didn't affect them in a way that it affected African Americans. Black British have had a much better time integrating with whites in Britain, though it's not been perfect and though it has been negative at many junctures, but it's not on the same level as what went on in America. And it's not on the same level as what went on in South Africa. So when she says a lot of the countries we're talking about don't carry the same baggage that the leftists say, she's saying that there is not an outcry of 10 million people in the UK, like there is in America, who have been damaged by the slave trade in the same way that the leftists would frame it from an African American point of view. Now, there are many Afro-Caribbeans in the UK that have the legacy of slavery. Much of that black population in the UK is made of Africans. Now, Africa was subject to colonialism and slavery. It was terrible. My solution is that I moved to Africa to invest my time and energy in the continent. That's been my solution. That's my personal solution. I don't know what the solution is on the governmental level. I have very little trust for politicians. I think they lie a lot. At the very least, young black people in the UK will switch on their TVs and realize that they can ride to the height of politics in the UK with their braided hair and their black skin. And if they want to go and lobby for reparations, they can. There's a path to go and do it, because there's already someone there showing you that they've done it and it's possible. I don't support all of her policies. I don't agree with everything she says. Is that a reason for us to say that we can't claim her? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think she deserves African support and black support, pushing emotion to the side and saying, I don't agree with this policy or that policy. But you know what? I'm Nigerian, she's Nigerian, and she showed other Nigerians that she could do it as well. Thank you so much for watching.